Hey, what's going on everybody? It's etaprime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at a brand new ultra slim mini PC from ASRock known as the Mars ADL. I've been wanting to get my hands on one of their Mars series mini PCs for a little while now, given the form factor, because this thing is absolutely tiny, only coming in at 0.7 liters. Now they do make a couple different variants with different CPU options, but with this we have 10 cores and 12 threads with the clock up to 4.4 gigahertz in this mini PC. And as you can see, I mean, this thing is absolutely tiny. Inside of the box, we're going to get a couple extra accessories here, like some M.2 heat sinks. This will support Nvme SSDs. We've also got a big VESA mount, and I guess this is kind of a security setup. We could kind of lock this down on the back of a monitor or underneath a desk or on a wall, basically wherever you want to mount it. Plus, this comes with a stand and a 65-watt power supply. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the look here, especially when we've got it set up with this stand. Now, it will sit vertically or horizontally. It's really up to you. We do have some rubber feet, so we can set this horizontally on the desk if you want to. And given that we're working with such a small form factor, this thing is actually packed with I/O. Up front, we've got a full-size SD card reader. We've also got two USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, two USB 2.0 ports, and Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4. And this is using the 40 gigabit protocol, so we've got full-size Thunderbolt 4 up front here. We can connect an eGPU, and by the end of the video, we'll definitely test it out. Moving around back, we've got a VGA port, full-size HDMI, two more USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, DC power in, and two 3.5mm audio jacks. We've got audio in and audio out. So yeah, I actually can't get over how small this thing is, and these do come bare bones, which means you will have to add your own storage and RAM. And this utilizes SODIMM DDR4 running at up to 3200 MHz. We've got two slots right here. We've also got our Wi-Fi card that's pre-installed, two Nvme slots so we can add plenty of storage, and right here we've got our cooling system. This is using a blower style fan with a copper heatsink. Assembly on these is really easy. I'm going to go with 16 gigabytes of Crucial DDR4 running at 3200 MHz. We definitely want to run in dual channel to get the most out of the iGPU here. And when it comes to storage, we can add two M.2 Nvme SSDs. We've got a Gen 3 and a Gen 4 port here. So for this, I'm going to go with a 1TB Aorus 7000S Nvme SSD. And inside of the packaging, along with this mini PC, we do get two M.2 heat sinks just to keep them a little cooler. But the M.2 that I'm going to be using already has one pre-installed. It's a bit beefy, but I've tested it and it actually fits right inside of here really, really well. So yeah, really loving the way this thing is set up so far. I'm really interested to see how it performs, but first up, we need to go over the specs of this little PC. Like I mentioned, they do offer a couple variants, but we're just going to go over what we have here in the video. So with this one here, the CPU is the Intel i5-1235U. This is actually one I haven't tested on the channel. We've got 10 cores, 12 threads, 2 performance cores up to 4.4 gigahertz, and 8 efficiency cores up to 3.3. And the way everything's set up with this mini PC, it'll run it up to 35 watts. And that's 35 watts in total package power, so that includes the CPU and the GPU side of things. Speaking of the GPU, we've got Intel Iris Xe graphics with 80 execution units up to 1200 MHz. This will support up to 64 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 3200 MHz. We've got Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, and I've installed Windows 11 Pro. So I've had a couple days to mess around with the Mars ADL, and overall it's really snappy. Now, one of my favorite CPUs of 2022 is the Intel i3-1215U. But with this, we're working with more performance cores, more efficiency cores, and a better iGPU. Overall, it's got a really nice jump in performance from that i3, and this is one I've been trying to get inside of a laptop for a while, but really the only place I could find it was in this mini PC. So using this as an everyday desktop is going to work out great. Email checking, web browsing, video playback from your favorite apps. This thing actually handles 4K really well. That Wi-Fi 6 built in is super snappy, or you could go with that 2.5 gigabit Ethernet we have on the back. It's really up to you. Web pages load up, almost instantaneously. We've got a lot of images here on ASRock's website. So getting through here works out really well. Very quick little system. But the first thing I actually wanted to show off was a little bit of 4K video playback. And when it comes to these Intel 12th Gen, I've had amazing luck with them when it comes to 4K video. Here's a 4K 60 HDR demo that I usually use on YouTube. And I've got stats for nerds up in the top left-hand corner. By the end of this, we only had 2 drop frames, and that kind of seems to be the case with these little Alder Lake CPUs. Even the i3-1215U gives me the basic same kind of performance. Last time I tested it, running a video, not the same one, we only had 2 drop frames through the whole playback at 4K 60. Next thing I wanted to do was test a little bit of PC gaming. I was actually really excited to see how this thing performs. Now, while this isn't on par with the older Iris Xe, given the clocks on this, only up to 1200 MHz, it still offers some pretty decent performance for what we have here. Forza Horizon 5, 720p, low, we can get an average of 66 FPS out of this game. But there is something holding us back here, and that's going to be the way they have the TDP set up in the BIOS. So once you go into the BIOS, you can actually set it to performance mode. In turn, it's going to give us a maximum TDP of 35 watts, and that's split up between the CPU and the GPU. And right now, it's sending sufficient power to the iGPU here to get that 1200 MHz clock, but if we take a look at the performance and the efficiency cores, we're nowhere near the max clock there. We need a little more wattage to kind of get more performance out of this, and unfortunately, we just can't get it out of this machine. Moving over to a few benchmarks that I ran, we've got Geekbench 5, single core, 1314, multi, 5880. I mean, not bad at all, but I do believe that this little chip has a little more to offer if we were able to up that TDP. Even when it comes to just CPU performance, I think we're not hitting those max clocks. Moving over to some GPU benchmarks, Wildlife 8122. I also ran 3D Mark Night Raid, coming in with an 11,667, and finally Firestrike with a 3,162. Checking out a few more PC games on the iGPU. First up, we've got Street Fighter V 1080p low medium mix. And when I mix this up here, basically we've got textures to medium, everything else is at low. But the resolution scale is set to 100%. Game looks great, and yeah, it'll play at 60 FPS. If you wanted to go to all medium settings, you could drop this down to 900p, or even 720 at high. It's really up to you. Next up, we've got Doom Eternal, and I was really hoping that we could get a constant 60 at 720p low, but we do get dips, so dynamic resolution scale is kind of a must on these iGPUs. And if you set it up at, let's say, 65 FPS, we could definitely get a constant 60 out of it. Basically, what it's going to do is lower the resolution scale and try to keep us right there at the frame rate we've got it set at. And it will do it with this machine. I was just hoping we could get away without it. And finally, we've got The Witcher 3, and going into this, I didn't think we were going to have an issue at 720p low, but as you can see, we are under 60 with it. And it really comes down to that TDP. We just can't send enough to the CPU and the GPU at the same time. So on the iGPU with this mini PC, we're not going to get a lot of great AAA gaming out of the way, at least at higher resolutions, but we've got a remedy because this does have Thunderbolt 4 built in. Personally, I would recommend something like a GTX 1650 or 1660, but I've got this GALAX GeForce RTX 4080, and I've been itching to test this over Thunderbolt, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. These new 4000 series cards draw way too much power, they're too big, too expensive, but you know, I've got one here for review, so I figured we'd go ahead and test it on this mini PC. Now, not a lot of people are going to do this, if anybody at all, but this is something I've been thinking about since the 4000 series cards were launched, so let's go ahead and do it with the Mars ADL. This card is way too big to fit inside of my eGPU enclosure, even though I've done a lot of modifications to it. It's just too massive to fit in there. So what I've got here is just a Thunderbolt 3 breakout board. It's basically the same thing they use in the Sonnet eGPU docks, and I've got a 750 watt power supply here plugged right into it and the card itself. And as you can see, I just had to wait a few seconds after plugging that Thunderbolt in, but now we've got video going from that GALAX RTX 4080 to the monitor. And now, instead of using the built-in Intel Iris Xe graphics, we've got the GALAX RTX 4080 connected here. Now we can still access those graphics, or we could disable them just to throw a little more power to the CPU side of things. And of course, with this connected over Thunderbolt, we're going to lose out on a lot of performance from that 4080. But like I mentioned, this is something I've been wanting to test, and I've got a chance to do it, so let's go ahead and test it out. Now, if you remember, I did run some benchmarks on the built-in iGPU. With Night Raid, we were around 11,000. With the RTX 4080 connected, 31,615. With Firestrike on the iGPU 3162, with the GALAX RTX 4080 connected 19,292. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely getting a nice bump in GPU performance. But these are synthetic benchmarks, so let's test out some real-world gaming. Doom Eternal 1440p Ultra Nightmare, we're getting over 100 FPS out of it. But you know, if this card was connected in a big PC through a PCIe X16 slot, then yeah, we'd get much better performance out of this game. And to tell you the truth, I've noticed that the NVIDIA 3000 series cards actually perform a little better over Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4. One of my personal favorites to connect to a little PC like this would be an RTX 3060 non-TI variant. They're relatively cheap used and they work really well over Thunderbolt 3. Obviously, this is overkill. We're not getting anywhere near the performance that this card can really put out, but I mean, it does work. So whenever I'm testing out these mini PCs, I always have it plugged into a kilowatt meter, kind of measuring the total system power consumption from the wall. At idle, we average 7 watts here. Average gaming, 39 watts, and the maximum that I could get this to pull from the wall was only 51 watts. And you got to keep in mind that from the BIOS I'm set to performance mode, we could also just go to balanced mode and not pull as much from the wall. Overall, the ASRock Mars ADL isn't a bad performer for what we have here. I do wish we could up the TDP a bit more over 35, that way we could get a little better iGPU performance, and you know, it would definitely help out with those CPU clocks. But if you wanted to pick something like this up for an everyday PC, light gaming, and emulation, it's going to work out fine the way it's set up out of the box. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Really appreciate you watching. This is one I definitely want to get a full emulation video out on. When it comes to the i3 1215U, it performs great. It'll even do a switch at around 18 to 20 watts, so I suspect we're going to get kind of the same performance out of this thing. And maybe even, and I do believe, even though we're a little limited here by the TDP, this is also going to handle PS3 quite well. So if you're interested in seeing a video like that, make sure you hit that subscribe button and maybe think about turning notifications on so you know when I post the next one. And you know, if you're interested in learning more, I'll leave some links to ASRock's website in the description. But that's it for this one. And like always, thanks for watching.